They say money screams, but wealth whispers. I never understood what that meant until the man I sacrificed everything for, my husband, Richard, handed me divorce papers on our 5th anniversary. He told me I was stagnant. He told me his new mistress, Jessica, was the partner a future CEO deserved. But the cruelest cut wasn't the betrayal. It was how they laughed at my father. They called him a janitor, a failure, a burden. They didn't know that the burden they mocked owned the very building they were standing in. They didn't know that my father wasn't just broke. He was the silent owner of the entire board. And by the time they found out, it was too late to run. The air inside the grand ballroom of the Pier Hotel smelled of expensive ambition, a mix of stale orchids, chilled Bollinger champagne, and Santal 33 perfume. It was the annual shareholders' gala for Vanguardia Holdings, one of New York City's most aggressive private equity firms. Clara Caldwell stood by the dessert table, nervously smoothing the fabric of her navy blue dress. It was a Diane von Furstenberg wrap dress she had bought at a sample sale 4 years ago. Around her, the wives and girlfriends of the other executives wore current season Oscar de la Renta and carried Birkin bags that cost more than Clara's first car. She scanned the room for her husband, Richard. Richard Caldwell was the man of the hour. At 34, he was the youngest regional director in Vanguardia's history. He was standing near the center of the room, holding court with 3 senior partners. He looked impeccable in his bespoke Tom Ford tuxedo, his hair gelled back with that precise, aggressive slickness that screamed Wall Street. Standing next to him, laughing a little too loudly at his jokes, was Jessica Pierce. Jessica was Vanguardia's PR director. She was everything Clara wasn't. Sharp, icy, and dripping in new money. She wore a backless emerald silk gown that clung to her like a second skin. Her hand rested casually, possessively, on Richard's forearm. Clara took a breath and walked over. Richard. They're about to start the speeches. Richard's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before he turned to her. His eyes didn't hold warmth. They held a flicker of annoyance. Clara, I didn't see you there. I've been here for an hour, Clara said softly, trying to ignore the way Jessica was raking her eyes over Clara's old address. I just wanted to wish you luck before you go up. Thanks, Richard said, checking his Rolex. Look, why don't you go sit at table 19? It's in the back, near the kitchen entrance. It'll be quieter for you. Table 19. Clara frowned. But the partners' spouses are sitting at table 1 and 2. Those tables are full, honey, Jessica interjected, her voice like syrup laced with arsenic. Besides, Richard needs to network tonight. It's strictly business at the head table. You understand, don't you? You don't want to be a distraction. Clara felt the heat rise in her cheeks. A distraction? She had worked 2 jobs to put Richard through his MBA at Wharton. She had proofread his essays, ironed his shirts, and comforted him when he failed his Series 7 exam the first time. Now she was a distraction. Before Clara could respond, a commotion at the ballroom entrance drew the room's attention. The heavy mahogany doors swung open, and security guards stepped forward, looking tense. A man had walked in. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo. He was wearing a faded flannel plaid shirt, stained khaki work pants, and heavy, scuffed construction boots. He held a battered Majestic baseball cap in his hands. It was Arthur, Clara's father. The room went silent. The juxtaposition of the gritty, elderly man against the crystal chandeliers and silk gowns was jarring. Dad! Clara gasped, rushing toward him. Richard's face turned a violent shade of red. He marched over, intercepting them before Clara could reach her father. Jessica followed close behind, a smirk playing on her lips. What the hell is this? Richard hissed, his voice low but audible to the nearby crowd. Arthur, what are you doing here? Security. Arthur looked tired. He had a gentle face, weathered by what everyone assumed was decades of manual labor. I'm sorry, Richie. I didn't mean to crash the party. Clara left her asthma inhaler at my place this morning when she dropped off the groceries. I know she gets tight-chested when she's stressed. I just wanted to bring it to her. He held out a small, red plastic inhaler. Clara reached for it, her eyes welling up. Thank you, Dad. You drove all the way from Queens for this. Couldn't have you wheezing, Bear. Arthur smiled weakly. Richard snatched the inhaler from Arthur's hand and shoved it at Clara. Great, she has it. Now get out. You're embarrassing me. Richard, stop, Clara whispered, horrified. He's my father. He's a janitor, Clara whispered, horrified. He's a janitor, Clegana lowered his voice. The room was watching now. Look at him. He smells like sawdust and cheap oil. I am about to be named Senior VP, and my father-in-law looks like he just crawled out of a sewer. Jessica stepped forward, swirling her champagne glass. She looked at Arthur with pure disdain. It really is tragic, she said, loud enough for the CEO, Mr. Galloway, to hear. Richard works so hard to elevate the family name, and this is what drags him down. You know, Arthur, the staff entrance is in the alley. Next time, try not to stain the carpet. A ripple of laughter went through the crowd. Arthur didn't get angry. He didn't yell. He just looked at Richard, a strange, unreadable expression in his gray eyes. You think the clothes make the man, Richard. I think success makes the man, Richard sneered. And you? You're a zero. A nobody. I bought this company more in the last quarter than you've earned in your entire miserable life. Now, get out before I have you thrown out. Arthur looked at Clara. I'm leaving, Bear. Are you coming? Clara looked at her husband. The man she had adored, the man she had built. Then she looked at her father, who had never let her down. She took a step toward Arthur. Richard grabbed her wrist. Hard. If you walk out those doors with him tonight, Clara, don't bother coming back to the penthouse. I'm done carrying dead weight. Clara froze. The threat hung in the air. She looked around the room, seeing the pity and amusement in the eyes of the elite. She felt small, powerless. I can't leave yet, Dad, Clara whispered, her voice trembling. I have to support Richard. Arthur's eyes saddened, but he nodded. Okay, Clara. Worce's eyes saddened, but he nodded. Okay, Clara, but remember, value isn't about the price tag. It's about the quality of the goods. He turned and walked out, his heavy boots thudding against the marble floor. Richard straightened his jacket, brushing off invisible dust where Arthur had been standing. Finally, he muttered. He turned to the crowd, raising his glass. Apologies, everyone. Just a little domestic hiccup. Let's get back to the real reason we're here, making money. The crowd cheered. Jessica clinked her glass against Richard's, whispering in his ear. Clara stood alone, clutching her inhaler, realizing that for the first time in her life she couldn't breathe, and it had nothing to do with asthma. 3 days after the gala, the axe fell. Clara came home early from her job as a library archivist at the New York Public Library. She had picked up Richard's favorite takeout sushi from Noble as a peace offering. Things had been icy since the party. When she unlocked the door to their Upper East Side apartment, she noticed 2 things immediately. First, there were 3 large Louis Vuitton suitcases packed by the door. Second, the air smelled like Santal 33. Jessica's perfume. Clara walked into the living room. Richard was sitting on the Italian leather sofa, drinking a glass of scotch. Jessica was standing by the window, looking out at the skyline, wearing one of Richard's dress shirts and nothing else. Clara dropped the sushi bag. The sound of the plastic hitting the floor echoed in the silence. Richard didn't even stand up. He took a slow sip of his drink. Sit down, Clara. What is she doing here, Clara? What is she doing here? Clara asked, her voice shaking. Why are your bags packed? They aren't my bags, Richard said calmly. They're yours. Clara felt the room spin. What? I'm filing for divorce, Richard said, sliding a manila envelope across the coffee table. It's over, Clara. It's been over for a long time. I just waited until the promotion was secured to make it official. You used me, Clara whispered. I paid for your degree. I paid the rent for 3 years while you were an intern. That was an investment, Richard shrugged. And you got a return on it. You got to live in this apartment, drive a nice car, and pretend to be somebody for a few years. But let's be honest, you don't fit in my world. You never did. You're a librarian, Clara. You're happy with coupons and public transit. Jessica turned from the window, a cruel smile playing on her lips. He needs a power couple image, Clara. My father is on the board of the Manhattan Trust. He can open doors for Richard that your father couldn't even unlock as a janitor. Don't talk about my father, Clara snapped, a sudden surge of anger cutting through her shock. Oh, please, Jessica laughed. Richard told me everything. How you send him money every month. How he lives in that rundown shack in Queens. It's pathetic. Richard is a thoroughbred. You're trying to hitch him to a mule. Richard stood up and walked over to Jessica, wrapping an arm around her waist. The lawyers have drawn up the papers. Since I bought the apartment before we were married, and the prenup you signed, remember that? Was airtight. You leave with what you brought, which is essentially nothing. You're kicking me out. Now. Tonight, Richard said coldly. Jessica is moving in. We have a dinner with the partners tomorrow, and I need the closet space cleared out by then. Clara looked at the man she had loved for 7 years. He looked at her as if she were a stain on his lapel. There was no remorse, no sadness, just cold, calculated business. Fine, Clara said, her voice surprisingly steady. She didn't cry. The tears wouldn't come. She just felt a hollow, cold clarity. I'll go. Good girl, Richard said, turning his back on her to pour another drink. Don't make a scene in the lobby. It reflects poorly on me. Clara grabbed the handles of her suitcases. She didn't look back. She walked out of the apartment, down the silent hallway, and into the elevator. It was pouring rain when she stepped out onto Fifth Avenue. She had no umbrella. She had $40 in her wallet, a maxed-out credit card from buying Richard's anniversary gift, and nowhere to go. She hailed a taxi, her wet hair plastering to her face. Where to, lady? The driver asked, eyeing her luggage. Clara hesitated. She had been ashamed of her background for so long, trying to hide it to please Richard. But now, it was the only place she had left. Queens, she said softly. Astoria. As the taxi pulled away, leaving the glittering lights of Manhattan behind, Clara took out her phone. She saw a notification from Instagram. Richard had just posted a photo. It was a picture of 2 champagne glasses clinking against the skyline view from their apartment. The caption read, New beginnings. Upward momentum only. Number power couple, number Vanguardia. Clara blocked him. Then she leaned her head against the cold glass and watched the city blur into streaks of light. She was going back to the shack. She was going back to the janitor. She didn't know it yet, but she was going back to the headquarters of an empire. The house in Astoria was exactly as Clara remembered it. A small 2-story brick row house with peeling white paint on the window frames and a porch that leaned slightly to the left. Inside, it smelled of old paper, lemon polish, and the pipe tobacco Arthur used to smoke years ago. Clara sat at the chipped Formica kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of hot cocoa. She was wearing an oversized t-shirt from her high school days, her eyes swollen and red. Arthur sat opposite her, peeling an orange with a small pocket knife. He was still wearing his flannel shirt, but he had taken off the heavy boots. He called you a zero, Dad, Clara choked out, fresh tears spilling over. He humiliated you in front of everyone, and I just stood there. I let him kick me out because I felt like I deserved it, like I really was just a librarian dragging him down. Arthur handed her a slice of orange. Do you believe him, Clara? Do you believe him, Clara? Do you believe you're worthless? Look at me, Clara gestured to the room. I'm 31. I'm divorced. I'm broke. I'm living in my dad's kitchen in Queens while my husband is probably popping champagne in his penthouse with a woman who looks like a supermodel. He won, Dad. Money wins. It always wins. Arthur stopped peeling the orange. He set the knife down on the table with a deliberate clack. Money is just fuel, Clara. If you put high-octane fuel in a broken engine, it still won't run. Richard is a broken engine. Arthur stood up. But you're right about one thing. In this world, unfortunately, people don't listen until you speak their language. And their language is green. What are you talking about? Arthur walked over to the kitchen pantry. I think the experiment has gone on long enough. Experiment? Arthur opened the pantry door. Inside were shelves of canned beans and pasta. He reached for a hidden panel behind the cereal box as a keypad. Key punched in a 6-digit code. Click. The back wall of the pantry didn't swing open like a secret door in a movie. Instead, a section of the floor near the refrigerator hissed and slid back, revealing a staircase leading down. But these weren't rickety wooden basement stairs. They were polished concrete, illuminated by motion sensor LED strips. Clara stood up, her cocoa forgotten. Dad, what is that? We don't have a basement. You always said the foundation was too weak. I said a lot of things, Bear, Arthur said, his voice dropping an octave, losing the shaky, elderly tremble he often used in public. He sounded strong, authoritative. Come with me. Clara followed him down. The room below the house wasn't a bunker. It was a command center. One wall was entirely covered in screens displaying live market tickers from Tokyo, London, and New York. There were maps with shipping lanes highlighted in glowing blue. On a sleek glass desk sat a single, secure satellite phone and a framed photograph of Clara's mother. But what caught Clara's eye was the logo etched into the glass wall behind the desk. It was a stylized A, intertwined with a globe. Aurelius Global, Clara read aloud. She frowned. I've seen that name. It's on the news. They're the conglomerate that just bought out the European shipping lines. They own half the pharmaceutical patents in the US. And the lithium mines in Nevada, Arthur added casually, walking over to the desk. And the cloud servers that run about 40% of the internet, and as of this morning, the majority stake in a mid-sized private equity firm called Vanguardia Holdings. Clara's knees gave out. She grabbed the edge of the desk to steady herself. Dad, you're Aurelius. Arthur Aurelius? Canther. Arthur Aurelius Caldwell, he said. I dropped the middle name when I met your mother. She liked simple things. She didn't want the billions. So I stepped back from the public eye 30 years ago. I let a board of directors run the face of the company, while I steered the ship from the shadows. I wanted you to grow up normal, Clara. I wanted you to find friends who liked you, not my jet. I wanted you to find a husband who loved you, not my portfolio. He looked at her with deep sadness. I thought Richard was the one. When he was struggling, I respected that you stuck by him. I thought he had character, but I see now that he was just hungry. And a hungry dog will bite the hand that feeds it if it thinks there's a steak on the table. Clara stared at her father. The janitor who cleaned up spills. The man who drove a 2004 Ford truck. He wasn't just rich, he was one of the most powerful men on the planet. You bought Vanguardia? Clara whispered. I've been quietly acquiring shares through shell companies for 6 months, Arthur said, tapping a keyboard. A screen flared to life, showing Richard's personnel file. I was planning to give it to Richard as a surprise for your 5th anniversary. I was going to reveal myself, hand him the keys to the kingdom, and let him run it under my guidance. Arthur's face hardened, but then he humiliated my daughter. Then he brought his mistress to the gala, and he called me a janitor. Arthur looked at Clara. He wants to play the big shot. He wants to worship at the altar of capitalism. Fine. I'm going to show him God. What are you going to do, Clara? What are you going to do? Clara asked, a mix of fear and adrenaline coursing through her veins. Nothing, Arthur said. I'm retired, remember? You are going to do it. Me? Dad, I'm a librarian. You are a Caldwell, Arthur said firmly. You have my blood. You listened to me discuss mergers over breakfast for 20 years. You just didn't realize that's what we were talking about. You know people. You know patience. And unlike Richard, you have a soul. Arthur opened a drawer and pulled out a black American Express card, the Centurion black card. But this one was made of anodized titanium and had no spending limit. He tossed it to her. Richard said you were stagnant. He said you didn't fit his world. So, we're going to change the world he lives in. Tomorrow, you are not going to the library. You are going to the Aurelius headquarters in Manhattan. You will have a team of stylists, lawyers, and business consultants waiting for you. We have a board meeting at Vanguardia in 3 weeks. Arthur smiled, a shark-like grin that terrified and thrilled her. Richard thinks he's getting a promotion at that meeting. Instead, he's going to meet the new owner. The transformation didn't happen overnight, but money is a powerful accelerant. For 3 weeks, Clara disappeared. Richard didn't notice, of course. He was too busy enjoying his freedom. He and Jessica were the darlings of the New York social scene. They were photographed at the Met Gala, courtside at the Knicks game, and dining at PSA. Richard blocked Clara's number and had the doorman at their old building instructed to turn her away if she ever tried to visit. He thought she was crying in Queens. He had no idea that she was in a penthouse suite at the Four Seasons, undergoing a boot camp that would break a Navy SEAL. Arthur didn't go easy on her. From 6 a.m. to midnight, Clara was working. Mornings were for Image. A team of stylists from Paris flew in. They cut her hair gone with a messy librarian waves. In their place was a sharp, asymmetrical bob, dyed a rich, glossy espresso. The soft cardigans were replaced by structured power suits from Alexander McQueen and Armani sharp lines. Monochromatic colors, killer heels, afternoons were for business. Arthur's top lieutenants, terrifying men and women who ran global economies, drilled Clara on balance sheets, hostile takeovers, and corporate governance. She learned to read a P&L statement in seconds. She learned the weaknesses of Vanguardia's portfolio. She learned exactly where Richard was burying his mistakes. He's leveraging the pension fund, Clara realized one night, staring at the documents Arthur had hacked from Richard's private server. He's using the employees' retirement money to pump up the stock price of that tech startup, Nebula. Exactly, Arthur said, nodding approvingly from the leather armchair. It's illegal, it's risky, and it's high yield. If Nebula crashes, the pension fund is wiped out. But Richard gets his bonus before that happens. He's gambling with people's lives, Clara said, her voice cold, just like he gambled with mine. So, Arthur asked, are you ready to collect the debt? Clara looked at her reflection in the window. The woman staring back wasn't the sad, discarded wife. She was a weapon. I'm ready. 3 weeks later, the Vanguardia boardroom, the conference room on the 50th floor of the Vanguardia building, was a fortress of glass and steel. The entire executive board was seated around the 30-foot mahogany table. Richard sat at the head of the table, even though he wasn't the CEO yet. The current CEO, Mr. Galloway, was retiring effective today. The vote to confirm Richard as his successor was a formality. Jessica sat against the wall, taking notes, flashing Richard supportive smiles. She looked smug. Gentlemen, Richard said, checking his watch, and ladies, we've had a record quarter. The Nebula acquisition is skyrocketing. Our stock is up 12%. I think the direction of this company is clear. Agreed, said an old board member. You've done good work, Richard. Ruthless, but good. However, Mr. Galloway interrupted, looking nervous. He kept glancing at the door. We have a slight procedural issue. As you know, a private holding company acquired 51% of our voting shares last month. Richard waved his hand dismissively. A silent investor. A ghost. They haven't made a peep. They're obviously happy with the returns I'm generating. Let's proceed with the vote. They aren't silent anymore, Galloway said, sweating. They sent a representative. She's here to cast the majority vote on the new CEO appointment. Richard frowned. She? Who is she? Who is she? Why wasn't I briefed on this? She insisted on anonymity until the meeting, Galloway said. The heavy double doors opened. The room went silent. The sound of high heels clicking against the marble floor was the only noise. Click. Click. Clara walked in. She was wearing a white bespoke suit that seemed to glow in the room's harsh lighting. Her lips were painted a deep crimson. A diamond choker worth more than the house she grew up in glittered at her throat. She didn't look at the floor. She didn't look at the walls. She looked straight at Richard. Richard blinked. He squinted. Then his jaw literally dropped. "Clara," he whispered. The word sounded like a question in a foreign language. Jessica dropped her pen. Clara ignored him. She walked to the empty chair at the opposite end of the table. The chairman's seat. She sat down, crossing her legs elegantly. She placed a thin black folder on the table. "I apologize for the delay," Clara said. Her voice was different, deeper, smoother. "Traffic in the tunnel was murder. Shall we begin? What is this?" Richard stood up, his face flushing red. "Clara, how did you get past security? Is this a joke? Did you sleep with a guard or something?" He looked around at the board members, laughing nervously. "I'm so sorry, everyone. This is my ex-wife. She's having a bit of a breakdown. I'll have her removed." Richard reached for the phone on the table. "Mr. Caldwell," Galloway said sharply. "Sit down." "Excuse me," Richard snapped. "I said sit down," Galloway said. "This is Miss Clara Caldwell. She is the proxy for Aurelius Global. She owns this company." Richard froze. "Caldwell, she owns this company." Richard froze. The receiver dangled from his hand before clattering back onto the cradle. "Aurelius? No, that's impossible. Her father is a janitor. She's nobody." Clara smiled. It was the same smile Arthur had used in the basement. "My father," she said clearly, "is Arthur Aurelius, and he sends his regards. He also asked me to return something to you." She slid the black folder down the long table. It spun perfectly, stopping right in front of Richard. "What is this?" Richard asked, his voice trembling. "It's a forensic audit of the pension fund," Clara said. "Specifically, the illegal leveraging of assets to pump the Nebula stock. We know, Richard. We know about the offshore accounts in the Caymans where you're skimming the transaction fees. We know everything." The room erupted. Board members began shouting. Jessica turned pale and started backing toward the door. "Wait," Richard stammered, sweat pouring down his forehead. "This is a setup. She's lying. She's just a bitter ex-wife trying to ruin me." Clara didn't shout. She didn't argue. She simply tapped the table with her index finger. "The SEC is waiting in the lobby, Richard," she said softly. "But before they come up, I have one piece of business to conduct as the majority shareholder." She looked him in the eye. "You're fired." The arrest of Richard Caldwell was not the quiet, dignified affair he would have hoped for. Because Clara controlled the building, she hadn't just invited the SEC. She had allowed the press into the lobby. When two federal agents in windbreakers escorted Richard out of the elevator, handcuffed and sans his tie, the flashes of paparazzi cameras were blinding. Richard looked like a deer in headlights. He tried to duck his head, shielding his face with his shoulder, but the image was already captured. The golden boy of Vanguardia, broken. Upstairs in the silent boardroom, the air was thick with tension. The remaining board members were terrified. They looked at Clara, not as a librarian, but as an executioner. "Rest assured," Clara said, smoothing the lapel of her white suit. "Aurelius Global is not interested in dismantling Vanguardia. We are interested in purifying it. Those of you who were unaware of Richard's fraud have nothing to fear. Those who helped him." She let the sentence hang. "You'll be hearing from our legal team." As the board members shuffled out, murmuring apologies and obeisance, only one person remained. Jessica Pierce. She stood near the window, her arms wrapped around herself. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a trembling, calculated vulnerability. She waited until the room was empty, then turned to Clara with tears in her eyes, tears that Clara knew she could summon on command. "Clara," Jessica began, her voice quivering. I didn't know." Clara didn't look up from the papers she was organizing. "You didn't know what, Jessica? That he was embezzling, or that he was married?" "The fraud," Jessica insisted, taking a step forward. "I had no idea he was leveraging the pension fund. You have to believe me. I'm a victim here, too. He manipulated me just like he manipulated you. He promised me the world, told me his marriage was a sham, told me you were stagnant." Clara finished for her, finally looking up. Her eyes were dry and hard. "He lied to both of us," Jessica pleaded. "Clara, please. I have a reputation. I have a career. If you fire me, if you link me to him publicly, I'm finished. Women should support women. We were both duped by a narcissist. Let me stay on. I can help you transition. I know where he hid the physical files." Clara stared at Jessica. For a moment, she remembered how small she had felt at the gala, standing in her old dress while Jessica laughed at her father. She remembered the smell of Santal 33 in her own apartment. "I have a recording," Clara said calmly. Jessica froze. "What?" Clara tapped her phone. "My father is a very thorough man. When he bought the building, he upgraded the security system, including audio in the executive suites." Clara pressed a button. Richard's voice filled the room, tinny but unmistakable. "Don't worry about the audit, Jess. I moved the cash to the shell company in Belize. As long as you keep falsifying the PR reports to distract the shareholders, we're golden. Just keep writing those press releases about our charitable initiatives to cover the smoke." Then, Jessica's voice on the recording. "Make sure you buy me that Cartier bracelet when the bonus hits, Richie. Being your accomplice is exhausting." Clara stopped the playback. The silence in the room was deafening. Jessica's face went from pitiful to pale white. The mask of the victim shattered instantly. "You knew," Clara said. "You weren't a victim, Jessica. You were the getaway driver." Jessica stammered, backing away. "The FBI is waiting in the hallway," Clara said, returning to her papers. "They're very interested in the PR reports you falsified. I suggest you save your tears for the judge. I hear federal prison is terrible for the complexion." Jessica didn't scream. She didn't fight. She simply collapsed inward, the weight of her greed finally crushing her. She turned and walked out the door, her high heels dragging, to meet the agents waiting for her. Clara stood alone in the empty boardroom. She walked to the window and looked down at the street, 50 stories below. She saw the tiny flashing lights of the police cars taking her husband and his mistress away. She thought she would feel happy. She thought revenge would taste like champagne. Instead, it tasted like ash. It was necessary. She knew that. But it was tragic that it had to happen at all. The door opened behind her. It was Arthur. He walked in slowly, carrying 2 paper cups of coffee from a bodega. "Black 2 sugars," he said, handing one to her. "Thanks, Dad." Clara took the cup, wrapping her cold hands around it. "You did good, Bear," Arthur said, standing beside her. "You held your ground." "I sent my husband to prison, Dad." "He sent himself to prison," Arthur corrected gently. "You just turned on the lights." "What happens now?" Clara asked. Arthur sipped his coffee, looking out at the city he silently owned a large piece of. "Now, the hard part begins. Destruction is easy, Clara. Building is hard. Vanguardia is yours to run now. You have thousands of employees depending on you. The pension fund is drained. You have to refill it. The reputation is in tatters. You have to mend it." He looked at her. "Richard wanted the title. You have the responsibility. That's the difference between a boss and a leader." Clara nodded, straightening her spine. "I'll liquidate the private jet," she said, her mind already shifting to strategy. "And the summer homes in the Hamptons, that should cover about 40% of the pension deficit. I can restructure the debt with Aurelius backing." Arthur smiled. It was a genuine, proud smile. That's my go. But the drama wasn't over. Richard was down, but he was a cornered animal, and 3 weeks later he tried to bite back. Richard made bail. It cost him every favor he had left, and his parents had to mortgage their retirement home in Florida to cover the bond. But he was out. He was awaiting trial for securities fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. His passport was seized, his accounts were frozen, and his face was on the cover of the New York Post under the headline, Wall Street Wolf Say Card. He was staying in a Motel 6 near JFK Airport because no reputable hotel would take his credit card, and the paparazzi were camped outside his apartment building. Clara received the call on her personal line late one rainy Tuesday. Clara. His voice was rough, slurring slightly. He had been drinking. Richard, she answered. She was sitting in her father's study in Queens, reviewing the quarterly projections. You shouldn't be calling me, my lawyer said. Screw the lawyers, Richard shouted, then lowered his voice. Clara, please, I need to see you, just once before the trial starts. I have things of yours. Photos, old letters. I want to give them back. I don't want the feds to take them. Clara hesitated. She knew it was a ploy. But she also knew that for 5 years this man had been her whole world. She needed closure, not the courtroom kind, but the human kind. Meet me at the diner on 21st Street, Clara said. In an hour. Arthur is coming with me. Fine, Richard spat. Bring the janitor. The diner was empty, aside from a truck driver eating pie in the corner. The neon sign buzzed overhead. Richard was sitting in a booth, looking unrecognizable. He hadn't shaved in days. His clothes were wrinkled. The arrogant, slicked-back Wall Street shark was gone. In his place was a desperate, angry man. Arthur and Clara sat opposite him. Arthur didn't order anything. He just watched Richard with that same unreadable gray gaze. You look terrible, Richard, Clara said quietly. I lost everything, Richard hissed. Because of you. You couldn't just divorce me. You had to ruin me. You vindictive. Stop, Arthur said. The word was soft, but it hit the table like a hammer. You ruined yourself, son. You broke the law. You stole from working people. I did what everyone does. Richard slammed his hand on the table. That's how the game is played. I was a star. I went to Wharton. I clawed my way up from nothing. You think you're better than me because you got lucky with some investments? I built myself. Arthur let out a low, dry chuckle. It was a chilling sound. You built yourself, Arthur asked. Is that what you think? I was top of my class, Richard sneered. I got the Bright Horizons Scholarship. Yes, Arthur nodded. The Bright Horizons Scholarship, administered by the Aurelius Foundation. Richard froze. What? Arthur leaned forward. I've been watching you since you were 20, Richard. I've been watching you since you were 20, Richard. I saw a young kid from a poor family who had drive, ambition. You reminded me of myself. So I created that scholarship specifically for you. I funded your tuition, fully. Richard's mouth opened, but no sound came out. And your first internship at Goldman, Arthur continued. I made a phone call, your first big promotion at Vanguardia. I tipped off the board that you were a person of interest. I smoothed the road for you, Richard, every single step of the way. No, Richard whispered, shaking his head. That's a lie. I wanted to see what you would do with a leg up, Arthur said. His voice filled with disappointment. I thought if I removed the financial barriers, your character would shine through. I thought you would be a good man, a good husband to my daughter. Arthur reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a photocopy of an old check, the check that paid Richard's tuition at Wharton. The signature at the bottom read, Aurelius Trust. I didn't just buy your company, Richard, Arthur said mercilessly. I bought your education. I bought your career. I practically bought your life. I made you, and when I saw that you were rotten, that you treated my daughter like an accessory, and your employees like cattle, I decided to unmake you. Richard stared at the check. His entire identity. The self-made man, the genius, the prodigy crumbled in seconds. He wasn't a shark, he was a pet that had bitten its owner. He looked at Clara. His eyes were wide with horror. You knew. I found out when I went into the files, Clara said. He wanted to help you, Richard. He loved you like a son. He never told me because he didn't want to hurt your pride. Richard put his head in his hands. The realization was destroying him. He wasn't defeated by an enemy. He was dismantled by his benefactor. Why? Richard croaked. Why tell me this now? Because, Clara said, standing up. You keep blaming the world. You keep blaming me. I wanted you to know that the world gave you every chance. You had a billionaire backing you, a wife who adored you, and a clear path to the top. You threw it all away for a little more money and a mistress who sold you out for a plea deal. Clara pasted a $5 bill on the table for the coffee she hadn't touched. Goodbye, Richard. I won't be visiting you in prison. Clara and Arthur walked out of the diner into the cool night air. Behind them, through the glass window, they saw Richard Caldwell, the man who thought he was a king, weeping into his hands, utterly alone. As they walked to the car, Arthur put his arm around Clara. Are you okay? He asked. Clara took a deep breath. The air smelled like rain and exhaust, but to her, it smelled like freedom. I'm fine, Dad, she said. Actually, I'm better than fine. I have a board meeting tomorrow. We're launching a new initiative. Ethical investing. No more shell companies. No more fraud. Sounds risky, Arthur teased. No more fraud. Sounds risky, Arthur teased. Maybe, Clara smiled. But I have a really good advisor. They got into the car, leaving the wreckage of the past behind them. But there was one loose end left. One final twist that neither of them saw coming, because while Richard was finished, the world of high finance was a tank full of sharks, and Clara had just spilled blood in the water. Someone else was watching Aurelius Global. Someone who didn't care about justice, only about the weakness exposed by the transition of power. As their car pulled away, a black sedan parked across the street turned on its headlights and slowly began to follow. The black sedan didn't try to run them off the road. It didn't try to ram them off the road. Instead, it executed a precise, aggressive maneuver, cutting in front of Arthur's car and forcing them to screech to a halt on the shoulder of the Queensboro Bridge. The rain was coming down in sheets now, blurring the lights of Manhattan into a watercolor of gold and steel. Stay in the car, Clara, Arthur said, his voice dropping to that low, dangerous register he rarely used. He reached under his seat. For a terrifying moment, Clara thought he was reaching for a weapon. Instead, he pulled out a heavily encrypted satellite phone, but before he could dial, the rear door of the black sedan opened. A man stepped out. He held a large black umbrella, shielding himself from the downpour. He walked calmly toward their car and tapped on the driver's side window. Arthur rolled it down an inch. Victor, I thought you were in Zurich. The man, Victor Kane, was a legend in the financial world, and not the good kind. If Arthur Aurelius was the builder of empires, Victor Kane was the demolition expert. He was a corporate raider who specialized in hostile takeovers of distressed companies, and right now, thanks to the scandal with Richard, Vanguardia was bleeding in the water. Hello, Arthur. Kane smiled. He was a handsome man in his 50s with silver hair and eyes that looked like chipped flint. I heard you had a little pest control problem at Vanguardia. I thought I'd offer my services. We're not selling, Victor, Arthur said coldly. Kane leaned down, looking past Arthur to Clara. Miss Caldwell, or should I say, the future Ms. Aurelius, you've done a marvelous job taking out the trash. But let's be honest, you're a librarian. You're playing dress-up in your daddy's suit. The market knows it. Vanguardia's stock dropped another 4% in after-hours trading. Clara felt a flare of anger, but she pushed it down. Emotion is a liability, Arthur had taught her. What do you want, Mr. Kane? Clara asked, her voice steady. I want the company, Kane said simply. I've acquired 20% of the voting shares from the panicked board members you scared this afternoon. I'm making a tender offer for the rest at 6 a.m. tomorrow. I'm making a tender offer for the rest at 6 a.m. tomorrow. If you reject it, I'll dump my shares, crash the price to zero, and buy the scraps in bankruptcy court. You have until sunrise to decide. Sell to me, and you walk away with your dignity. Fight me, and you lose everything. He tapped the roof of their car twice. Sleep on it. He turned, got back into his sedan and drove away, disappearing into the rain. Arthur let out a long breath. Kane. I should have known. He smells blood. He's right, isn't he? Clara asked, watching the taillights fade. The market doesn't trust me. If he dumps his shares, the panic will be uncontrollable. The pension fund will be wiped out for good. All those employees, they'll lose everything. Arthur looked at his daughter. This is the real test, Clara. Richard was a child playing with matches. Victor Kane is an arsonist. I can step in, call in favors, and block him. But if I do that, the world will always see you as Arthur's daughter. If you want to lead, you have to fight your own battles. Clara looked at the city skyline. She thought about the years she spent organizing archives, finding needles in haystacks, connecting dots that no one else saw. She wasn't a shark like Kane. She was something else. She was a researcher. Take me to the office, Clara said. It's midnight, Clara. Take me to the office, Dad, she repeated, her eyes hardening. I have 6 hours until sunrise. I need to read. 4 a.m., the war room. The Aurelius Global Headquarters was silent, save for the hum of servers. Clara sat in the center of the conference room, surrounded by towers of paper. She wasn't looking at Vanguardia's files. She was looking at Victor Kane's. Arthur sat in the corner, sipping espresso, watching her work. He hadn't said a word in 4 hours. He's bluffing, Clara muttered, scanning a document from the Hong Kong exchange. Kane never bluffs, Arthur cautioned. He has the liquidity to crash the stock. He has the liquidity on paper, Clara corrected, slamming a file shut. She stood up and walked to the whiteboard, uncapping a red marker. Look at this. Kane Enterprises just bought a massive stake in lithium-ion tech in Bolivia. But the mining permits are stalled. He leveraged his European assets to cover the buy-in. Clara drew a line connecting Kane's assets. He's cash poor, Dad. He's over-leveraged. He needs Vanguardia because our cash reserves are high enough to cover his margin calls in Bolivia. He's not trying to buy us because we're weak. He's trying to buy us because he is weak. Arthur stood up, walking to the board. He studied her diagram. A slow smile spread across his face. He's robbing Peter to pay Paul. Exactly, Clara said. If he dumps his Vanguardia shares, sure, he hurts us. But he devalues his own portfolio by 40%. His lenders will call in his loans by noon. He'll be insolvent. So what's the play? Arthur asked. Clara picked up the phone. Get me the number for the Bolivian Ministry of Mining. And then, get Victor Kane on the line. 6:05 a.m. The sunrise call. Victor Kane answered on the first ring. He was likely already dressed, waiting for their surrender. Good morning, Clara. Kane's voice was smooth. Do I have a deal, or do I press the big red button? Go ahead, Victor, Clara said into the speakerphone. She was standing by the window, watching the sun crest over the East River. Dump the shares. There was a silence on the other end. Excuse me. You heard me, Clara said. Dump them. Crash the price, but before you do, you should know that I just got off the phone with a contact in La Paz. Rumor has it that Kane Enterprises is facing a massive regulatory freeze on your lithium assets. If your Vanguardia shares lose value, your collateral for the Bolivian loan evaporates. Clara paused for effect. If you press that button, Victor, you don't destroy me. You commit financial suicide. I can weather a stock dip. My father backs me. But you? You'll be liquidated by lunch. The silence on the line stretched for 10 seconds. It felt like a lifetime. "You did your homework," Kane said finally. His voice had lost the arrogance. It was flat, respectful. "I'm a librarian, Mr. Kane," Clara said icily. "I know how to do research. Now, here is my offer. You will sell your 20% stake in Vanguardia back to me, but not at market price. You'll sell it at a 10% discount. In exchange, Aurelius Global will provide a bridge loan to stabilize your Bolivian interest. We help you. You get out of my company." It was a masterstroke. She wasn't just defeating an enemy, she was turning him into an asset. "You have your father's teeth," Kane murmured. "Fine. Send over the paperwork. Deal." The line clicked dead. Clara slumped against the desk, her legs trembling. The adrenaline crashed out of her system. Arthur walked over and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You didn't just save the company, Clara. You just earned your name." The federal prison in upstate New York was a stark contrast to the penthouses of Manhattan. The walls were gray concrete, the air smelled of bleach and misery. Richard Caldwell sat behind a plexiglass partition. He looked 10 years older. His hair was thinning, and the orange jumpsuit hung loosely on his frame. The arrogance was gone, scrubbed away by the reality of a 5-year sentence for securities fraud. Clara sat on the other side. She wasn't wearing a power suit today. She was wearing jeans and a simple sweater. She looked happy, lighter. "Why did you come?" Richard asked, his voice rasping through the intercom phone. "To bloat." "No," Clara said. "I came to say thank you." Richard frowned. "Thank me. I ruined our marriage. I tried to steal from your father. I called you a failure." "Yes," Clara nodded. "You did all those things. And because of that, I found myself. I found my spine. I found out that I wasn't just a supporting character in your movie, Richard. I was the protagonist of my own." She looked at him with pity, but no longer with pain. "I signed the divorce papers this morning," she said. "The house in the Hamptons was sold. The proceeds went to the pension fund you drained. The employees are safe. The company is safe." "And Jessica?" Richard asked, looking down. "She took a plea deal," Clara said. "She's working in a call center in Ohio. She testified against you to cut her sentence." Richard let out a bitter laugh. "I guess I picked the wrong partner in every sense." "You didn't pick a partner, Richard," Clara said, standing up to leave. "You picked a prop, and props don't hold you up when the stage collapses." She hung up the phone. She didn't look back as she walked out of the visitation room, through the heavy steel doors, and into the bright sunlight of the parking lot. Arthur was waiting for her, leaning against his old 2004 Ford truck. He had sold the limousine. He said he preferred the truck. It kept him humble. "How was it?" Arthur asked, opening the door for her. "Closure," Clara said. She climbed in. "So, where to?" Clara said. She climbed in. "So, where to?" "Well," Arthur started the engine, which rumbled with a familiar, comforting sound. "I was thinking we go to that diner in Queens. I hear they have a new janitor. Nice guy. I was thinking of offering him a scholarship." Clara laughed, a true, full laugh that felt like sunshine after a storm. "You're never going to stop, are you? The world is full of broken engines, Bear." Arthur smiled, pulling onto the highway. "Someone has to help fix them." Clara rolled down the window, letting the wind catch her hair. She wasn't the wife of a rising star anymore. She wasn't the invisible daughter of the janitor. She was Clara Caldwell, CEO of Vanguardia, heir to the Aurelius Empire. And she was just getting started. And that is the story of Clara and Arthur. It's a powerful reminder that true worth isn't found in a bank account, a designer suit, or a fancy title. Richard had all the appearance of success, but none of the substance. Arthur had all the substance, but cared nothing for the appearance. In a world that tells us to fake it till we make it, be like Clara, do the work, do the research, and never ever let someone treat you like you're stagnant, because you never know the person they're mocking might just own the building they're standing in. If you enjoyed this story of justice, betrayal, and redemption, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow, and if you want more stories like this, Make sure to subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss the next episode. What would you have done if you were in Clara's shoes? Would you have forgiven Richard, or did he get exactly what he deserved? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.